In this lesson, we're taking a look at what we mean by a musical key and how to figure out which notes are present in all 12 keys. To do this, we're going to use something called the circle of fifths, which you might have heard of already, even if you're not sure how to use it, but no worries either way because we're going to make sense of it all in this video. This is part of my intermediate theory course. So far, we've covered intervals as well as chord and scale building, so check those lessons out if you haven't already. You can also access some extra resources such as further reading and diagrams on my Patreon page, which is all linked in the description. So what is a musical key? Well, a key is a family of notes and chords that work well together and create a certain sound. We can have major and minor keys to create music with a generally more cheery or moody tone, and like other aspects of music, keys are based off of a root note, or actually in this case it's more like a root chord. So as you might imagine, the key of G major is based off of a G major chord, the key of A minor is based off of an A minor chord, and so on. Each key contains 7 different notes which form a scale, and we can build a chord off each note of this scale, creating a family of 7 chords. I often describe this to students as the scale and the chords being built from the same pool of notes. So for example, we could write a chord progression using a selection of the 7 chords in the key of G major, and then we could either improvise or write a melody on top of that using the G major scale. So just to clarify the benefits of learning about keys, you can easily put together chord progressions which work well, which is great for things like jamming and songwriting and using a looper. You'll also be able to match up which scales work with which chords, which is great for improvising and writing melodies. And finally, you'll be able to work out songs and bring your ideas to life much quicker, because once you've deciphered a key, it hugely narrows down the number of chords that you're working with, enabling you to find the sound you're looking for much quicker. So with that in mind, let's take a look at how you find the notes in each key. Finding notes in keys can be done in a variety of ways. If you've seen my scale building video, you'll know all about the tone-tone-semitone method, which is great for figuring out notes in a linear fashion. But here we're going to use the circle of fifths, which offers an efficient way to cover all the notes in all 12 keys. So here is the circle of fifths. It looks a bit like a clock in that it has 12 points, only here the 12 points are the root notes of keys rather than times of day. You'll notice that the root notes aren't laid out in alphabetical order, and that's because if reading clockwise, they're laid out in fifths, which is why we call it the circle of fifths. So if we start with C at the top and move clockwise, G is the fifth of C, D is the fifth of G, A is the fifth of D, and so on. It's also worth noting that a fourth is the inverse of a fifth. For example, as mentioned, G is the fifth of C, but C is actually the fourth of G. So if we read anti-clockwise, we could call it the circle of fourths. And this is good to know to help memorize which notes are the fourths and fifths of one another. So what has this got to do with keys? Well, with the root notes laid out in this order, we can easily plot out how many sharps or flats each key has. The key of C major is going to be our starting point, as it has 0 sharps or flats. It simply contains the 7 natural notes. However, as we move around the circle, each clockwise step adds an extra sharp note to the key. So the key of G major has 1 sharp, D major has 2 sharps, A has 3 sharps, all the way around to F sharp at the bottom, which has 6 sharps. Alternatively, every anti-clockwise step from C adds an extra flat note to the key, so F major has 1 flat, B flat major has 2 flats, all the way around to G flat at the bottom, which has 6 flats. Now the reason we use the flat rather than sharp root notes down the left side of the circle is mainly for efficiency. For example, the key of E flat has 3 flats, whereas the equivalent key of D sharp would actually have 5 sharps and 2 double sharps. So these 2 keys sound exactly the same, but I'm sure we'd all agree that the option of just the 3 flats is far easier and more convenient to work with. However, you've probably noticed both F sharp and G flat displayed right at the bottom, and that's because they both contain 6 accidentals, so essentially they're both equally awkward, and if you're in that key, you can just choose whichever you prefer. So now we can use the circle of fifths to figure out how many sharps and flats are in each key, but how do we know which notes to actually sharpen or flatten? Well, this is where we have to learn this handy little mnemonic phrase for the circle of fifths to help us memorize the order of the notes. And we're actually starting from the F and working clockwise, so the order of notes is F, C, G, D, A, E, and B, and the phrase to memorize is Father Charles goes down and ends battle. I think this is fairly universal. I'd expect most musicians who've studied this to recognise that phrase. It's definitely one of the ones I've got etched into my memory alongside the tone-tone-semitone pattern, but by all means create your own mnemonic if it helps you personally. So what's the use of this Father Charles thing? Well, this is the order of notes we sharpen as we progress through the sharp keys. So we mentioned before that G has one sharp, and that sharp would be F because it's the first letter of the mnemonic. So the key of G major contains all the natural notes apart from F, which becomes F sharp. So with those notes put into order, G major contains G, A, B, C, D, E and F sharp. In the next key, D major, we have two sharps, which are F and C for Father and Charles. So D major contains D, E, F sharp, G, A, B and C sharp. The next key would be A, which contains three sharps, F, C and G for Father Charles goes. So A major contains A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp and G sharp and so on. Now when it comes to flat keys, we have to reverse the pattern. So the order of notes becomes B, E, A, D, G, C and F. And we can alter the mnemonic to suit this. So it now reads battle ends and down goes Charles's father. We then treat the system exactly the same and flatten an extra note with every anti-clockwise step. For example, the key of F has one flat, which would be B for battle. So F major contains F, G, A, B flat, C, D and E. The next key would be B flat, which contains two flats, B and E for battle ends. So B flat major contains B flat, C, D, E flat, F, G and A. The next key would be E flat, which contains three flats, B, E and A for battle ends and. So E flat major contains E flat, F, G, A flat, B flat, C and D and so on. So that covers major keys, but what about the notes in minor keys? Well, a good way to approach this is to use relative major and minor, whereby for every major key there is a corresponding minor key which contains the exact same notes and chords. I covered this in detail in my scale construction lesson, so do check that out if you're unfamiliar. For now, all you have to be aware of is that the root of the relative minor is located 3 semitones below the major root. So for example, the relative minor of C is A minor. So like C major, the key of A minor also contains no sharps or flats. Then as we move around the circle of fifths, the relative minor of G is E minor. So like G, the key of E minor contains one sharp, which is F sharp. The relative minor of D is B minor, so like D major, the key of B minor contains two sharps, F sharp and C sharp, and so on. So if you're comfortable figuring out the major keys, you can expand that knowledge to minor keys fairly easily using the relative minor, and quite often circle of fifths diagrams will show the relative minor of each key on an inner circle. Definitely test yourself on all this, so follow the process step by step and see if you can figure out the notes in a variety of different keys, and then be sure to check your results and see if you've gone wrong anywhere. You might get muddled from time to time, as I definitely did, but the more you put it into practice, the more it'll all start to click into place, and the more you apply this to your actual musical practice, the more you'll start to memorize which notes fit into which keys anyway, so the less working out you'll have to do over time. In the next video, we're going to take it a step further and look at chords in keys, so you can start writing and using chord progressions in major and minor keys. So check that out, as well as the other lessons in this intermediate theory course, which are all linked in the description. You'll also find a link to my Patreon page there too, where you can download some extra resources such as further reading and diagrams. Be sure to subscribe for more content, and I'd really appreciate you giving this video a like if you found it helpful, and I'll see you in the next one.